Drop the tool and get on the ground, now.
I'm on my own property fixing my fence. Put the gun down.
You don't get to tell me what to do. You match the suspect.
I'm a homeowner and a retired Army Master Sergeant. This ends badly if you keep going.
Drop it.
All right.
Slowly.
Hammers down, hands are empty.
Stay right there.
Deputy Kyle Vance had been wearing the badge of the Pinewood County Sheriff's Department for just over 5 years when he made a decision that would incinerate his career and cost the taxpayers of this county exactly $1.9 million. He was 29 years old, fit, ambitious, and possessed a dangerous combination of limited life experience and absolute certainty in his own instincts. He walked with a swagger that suggested he had seen it all, though most of his shifts involved traffic stops and noise complaints. But on a bright Tuesday morning in October, Vance's inability to distinguish between a criminal threat and a law-abiding citizen would turn a quiet suburban street into a national headline. He believed he was the thin blue line protecting civilization. Instead, he became the very chaos he was sworn to prevent. Before we get into the details of how this unfolded, where are you tuning in from? If you believe that respect is something earned, not given just because you wear a uniform, hit that subscribe button. We need to keep telling these stories. The setting for this disaster was the pristine, tree-lined neighborhood of Oak Creek. It's the kind of place where folks retire after 40 years of grinding at the mill or the office, where lawns are manicured with military precision and American flags hang from sturdy porches. It was 10:30 a.m. The sun was high and bright, casting long shadows through the turning autumn leaves. The air was crisp, the kind of weather that makes a man want to work with his hands. Marcus Thorne was doing exactly that. At 64 years old, Marcus was a man carved from granite and discipline. He was a retired Master Sergeant of the United States Army, a man who had given 22 years of his life to his country, serving tours in conflicts that most young deputies only knew from video games. He had the knees and the shoulder scars to prove it. Marcus had purchased his split-level home in Oak Creek 20 years ago, paid for with the sweat of his brow and the GI Bill. He was a pillar of this community, the kind of neighbor who loaned you tools and never asked for them back, the man who snow-blowed the widow's driveways in the winter without a word of complaint. On this particular Tuesday, Marcus was tending to his castle. A section of his white picket fence had started to lean after a heavy storm the week prior, and Marcus, a man who took immense pride in maintenance, wasn't about to hire a contractor for a job he could do himself. He was wearing his work clothes, a faded gray Army t-shirt that hugged his broad chest, a pair of worn-in cargo pants stained with paint and oil, and heavy work boots. He moved with a deliberate, practiced rhythm. He wasn't rushing. He was removing the rotted wood, measuring twice, and preparing to set a new post. He had a crowbar in one hand and a claw hammer on his belt. He was on his own property, listening to classic rock on a small radio, minding his own business. To anyone with a lick of common sense, Marcus looked exactly like what he was, a homeowner fixing his fence on a beautiful fall day. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't acting suspicious. He was working. But common sense is a commodity that seems to be in short supply these days, especially when prejudice clouds the vision. To the wrong pair of eyes, Marcus's presence wasn't a picture of domestic tranquility. It was a threat. And unfortunately for Marcus, the wrong pair of eyes was watching him from across the street, peering through the blinds with a mixture of fear and ignorance. Bradley Cummings had only lived in Oak Creek for 3 months. At 34 years old, he was a mid-level marketing manager who had moved from the city seeking safety and quiet. Bradley was the type of man who viewed the world through a lens of constant suspicion, a man who checked his doorbell camera 20 times a day and posted on the neighborhood watch app about suspicious vehicles that were usually just delivery drivers. He didn't know Marcus. He hadn't bothered to introduce himself to the neighbors yet. He preferred to observe from the safety of his living room. From his window, Bradley didn't see a decorated veteran maintaining his property. He saw a black man in dirty clothes wielding a crowbar. He saw muscles and a grim expression. In Bradley's mind, which had been fed a steady diet of fear-mongering cable news and internet paranoia, the narrative wrote itself instantly. This wasn't a repair job. It was a break-in. He convinced himself that the homeowners, whoever Bradley thought they were, must be at work, and this brazen criminal was prying open the side gate to loot the place in broad daylight. Bradley watched for another 2 minutes, his heart rate climbing for no reason other than his own fabricated panic. He saw Marcus wrench a stubborn plank of wood free with the crowbar. Crack. The sound of the wood splitting made Bradley jump. That was it. He fumbled for his smartphone, his fingers trembling, and dialed 911. He didn't take a second to look at the mailbox, didn't notice the confident way the man moved around the yard. He just reacted. 911, what is your emergency? The dispatcher asked, her voice calm and professional. I need police immediately, Bradley whispered, though he was inside his own locked house. There's a man trying to break into a house across the street. He has a weapon, a giant metal bar. The dispatcher's tone shifted, becoming more urgent. Sir, are you safe? Can you describe the suspect? I'm inside. He hasn't seen me, Bradley said, peeking through the slats of his blinds. He's a black male, large build, wearing military-style pants. He's using a crowbar to smash through the fence and the side door. He's violent. He's tearing the place apart. Is he alone? Yes, but he looks dangerous. Please hurry. The owners probably aren't home, but he's going to get inside any second. We have officers en route, sir. Stay on the line. Bradley hung up, feeling a surge of self-righteous adrenaline. He believed he was being a hero. He believed he was protecting his new neighborhood from the element he had moved here to avoid. He didn't realize that he had just aimed a loaded weapon at an innocent man. The information he gave the dispatcher, smashing through violent weapon, transformed a routine welfare check into a high-priority felony call. The call went out over the radio frequencies, stripped of nuance, stripped of context. Burglary in progress. Suspect armed with a metal bar. Forcible entry. And of all the deputies patrolling the county that morning, the one who picked up the call was the one man who should have been nowhere near it. Deputy Kyle Vance heard the code for a burglary in progress, and he didn't check his computer for homeowner records. He didn't wait for backup. He hit his lights, slammed on the accelerator, and sped toward Oak Creek with a vision of glory in his head. Deputy Kyle Vance had a reputation, though it wasn't the one he thought he had. In the locker room, he talked a big game about being a sheepdog protecting the flock from the wolves, but his personnel file told a different, darker story. In 5 years, Vance had racked up 6 formal complaints. That's a number that should make any supervisor sweat. 4 of them involved excessive force. 2 involved racial profiling. There was the incident 2 years ago where he pulled over a Hispanic grandfather for a broken taillight and ended up detaining him for an hour on the side of the road, searching his truck for drugs that didn't exist because Vance thought he looked nervous. There was the time he tackled a college student at a park because he thought a frisbee dispute was a gang fight. In every instance, Vance had been cleared or given a slap on the wrist. Retraining was the official term. His supervisors, an old boys club that valued arrest statistics over community trust, viewed Vance as proactive. They said he had a nose for crime. They ignored the fact that his nose seemed to be permanently congested with bias. Vance was results-oriented, but his methods were sloppy. He treated every call like a combat drop. He lacked the ability to de-escalate. To Vance, compliance had to be immediate and absolute. Anything less was a challenge to his authority. He had failed the empathy portion of his psychological evaluation twice, but passed on the 3rd try. He viewed the citizens of Pinewood County not as the people he served, but as potential suspects he hadn't caught yet. As his cruiser tore down the asphalt, weaving through the mid-morning traffic, Vance's mind was already made up. He wasn't going to investigate a situation. He was going to take down a bad guy. He visualized the suspect described on the radio. Black male crowbar breaking in. It fit perfectly into the narrow, prejudiced categories Vance kept in his head. He didn't consider that a burglar usually doesn't break into a house at 10:30 a.m. on a Tuesday in plain sight. He didn't consider that military pants might be worn by actual military personnel. He only saw the collar. He turned onto Sycamore Drive, the engine of his cruiser roaring. He didn't cut the siren to approach quietly. He wanted the intimidation factor. He wanted the suspect to know fear before Vance even stepped out of the car. This was the mindset of a man who plays soldier but has never understood the discipline of a true warrior. Marcus Thorne heard the siren wail, but he didn't look up immediately. He was focused on pulling a rusted nail out of a cedar post. In Marcus's world, sirens were for other people accidents on the highway medical emergencies 3 streets over. He had no reason to believe the cavalry was coming for him. He was just a man fixing a fence. He wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his glove, took a sip of iced tea from the thermos on his porch steps, and picked up his hammer. That was the moment Deputy Vance skidded to a halt in front of Marcus's driveway. The cruiser was parked aggressively, blocking the view. Light bar flashing blue and red against the peaceful autumn leaves. Vance didn't assess the scene. He didn't look for a getaway car. He didn't notice the pristine condition of the rest of the house. He kicked his door open and unholstered his service weapon before his boots even hit the pavement. The silence of the neighborhood was shattered not by the siren, but by the screaming voice of a 29-year-old man with a gun. "Drop the weapon! Drop it now! Get on the ground!" Marcus. Thorne froze. He turned slowly, his movements deliberate, conditioned by decades of handling firearms and high-stress situations. He saw the barrel of a Glock 17 pointed directly at his chest. He saw the young deputy face flushed veins bulging in his neck, crouching behind the open door of the patrol car. Marcus didn't drop to his knees. He didn't throw the hammer. He simply lowered his hands to his sides, keeping them open and visible. He stood tall, his spine stiffening with the dignity of a man who knows exactly who he is. "Officer." Marcus set his voice a deep rumbling baritone that carried easily across the lawn. "There is no need for that firearm. I am holding a hammer. I am repairing my fence. I said get on the ground. Now drop the weapon or I will shoot." Vance screamed, his voice cracking slightly. He was pumped full of adrenaline and fear, a dangerous cocktail. He wasn't seeing a homeowner. He was seeing the armed suspect from the dispatch call. Marcus looked at the boy because that's what he saw, a boy with a dangerous toy and no discipline. "Son, listen to me carefully. I am the homeowner. My name is Marcus Thorne. I live here. This is my property. I don't care who you are. Get on the ground." Vance began to advance, leaving the cover of his car door. He moved with jerky, aggressive steps, closing the distance. "Do it now." Marcus remained standing. He knew the physics of the situation. If he made a sudden move to lie down, this nervous rookie might twitch and put a round in him. Staying standing calm and visible was actually safer, provided the officer didn't panic. "I am not getting on the ground in my own front yard, Deputy. I have identification in my back pocket. I am a retired Master Sergeant. Put the gun away, and let's talk like men." This was the wrong thing to say to Kyle Vance. To Vance, reason sounded like defiance. The mention of rank sounded like a challenge to his own authority. He was within 10 feet of Marcus now. "Last warning," Vance bellowed. "I am complying by not moving," Marcus said calmly. "I am not a threat. Look at the fence. Look at the tools." Vance didn't look. He holstered his weapon in a split-second decision to go hands-on, convinced he needed to physically dominate this suspect. He rushed Marcus, grabbing the older man by the shoulder and the wrist. "You're under arrest!" Vance shouted. "For what?" Marcus demanded, bracing his feet. He didn't fight back, didn't strike the officer, but he didn't make himself light either. He was 220 pounds of solid muscle. "Unbind me. You are making a mistake. Resisting. You're resisting." Vance chanted the magic words that bad cops use to justify their escalation. He hooked his leg behind Marcus's knee and threw his weight forward. Marcus went down. He could have stopped it. He knew hand-to-hand combat techniques that could have immobilized the deputy in 3 seconds flat. But he knew that fighting back against a police officer, even a wrong one, was a death sentence for a black man in America. So he took the fall. He hit the grass hard. A sharp, blinding pain shot through his right shoulder, the same shoulder that had taken shrapnel in the Gulf War, the shoulder that had required 3 surgeries to reconstruct. Marcus grunted, his teeth clenched tight. "Watch the shoulder." Marcus gasped, his face pressed into the smell of his own freshly cut grass. "I have a service injury. Watch the shoulder." Vance didn't listen. He was in control mode. He jammed his knee into the small of Marcus's back, putting his full weight on the veteran's spine. He grabbed Marcus's right arm, the bad one, and wrenched it behind his back with unnecessary torque. "Stop fighting!" Vance yelled for the benefit of the imaginary audience, even though Marcus was lying perfectly still. "I am not fighting." Marcus gritted out the pain, causing sweat to bead instantly on his forehead. "You are injuring a disabled veteran. I am telling you, my ID is in my back right pocket." Vance snapped the handcuffs on. He ratcheted them tight, tighter than regulation, the metal biting into Marcus's wrists. He didn't check for spacing. He was breathing heavy, feeling the rush of the capture. By now, the commotion had drawn the neighborhood out. Not just Bradley Cummings, who was peeking from his door, but the real neighbors. Mrs. Gable, a 70-year-old retired school teacher from next door, stepped onto her porch. Tom Henderson, a calm, middle-aged accountant from 2 doors down, walked right out onto the sidewalk. "Hey!" Tom shouted, his voice steady but angry. "What the hell are you doing? That's Marcus." Vance looked up wild-eyed. "Back up, police business. Back up or you're next." "That is the homeowner," Mrs. Gable yelled, clutching her cardigan. "He's lived here for 20 years. You get off him right now." Vance ignored them. In his mind, the crowd was hostile. The suspect was secured, and he was the hero who had neutralized the threat. He hauled Marcus to his feet. Marcus stumbled his shoulder, screaming in agony, but he regained his footing. He looked Vance dead in the eye. There was no fear in Marcus's gaze, only a cold, terrifying disappointment. "You have just destroyed your life, son," Marcus said quietly. "I tried to tell you." "Shut up," Vance spat. He pushed Marcus toward the patrol car. "You can tell it to the judge." Vance leaned Marcus against the hood of the cruiser, the metal hot from the engine. He began the pat-down search, aggressive and rough. He patted down the cargo pants, feeling for weapons. He found a tape measure. He found a pencil. And then he reached into the back right pocket. Vance pulled out a worn leather bifold wallet. He flipped it open. There behind the clear plastic window was a Florida driver's license. The photo was clearly Marcus Thorne. The address listed was the exact house they were standing in front of, 412 Sycamore Drive. Vance stared at it. His brain stuttered. The adrenaline began to curdle into something cold and sick in his stomach. Homeowner. He flipped a flap. A Department of Defense retired military ID card. Master Sergeant Marcus Thorne, U.S. Army. Vance looked at the ID. Then he looked at the house. Then he looked at the fence where the tools were neatly laid out. The narrative he had built, the burglar, the crowbar, the danger crumbled instantly. He was holding proof that he had just assaulted and handcuffed an innocent man on his own property. But here is where character reveals itself. A good man would have realized the mistake, uncuffed the suspect immediately, and started apologizing profusely. A good officer would have owned the error. Kyle Vance was not that man. His ego was too fragile to accept that he had been so completely wrong. Panic set in, but it was a selfish panic. If I let him go now, I admit I messed up. If I charge him, I justify the use of force. He shoved the wallet into his own pocket. "Doesn't matter," Vance muttered more to himself than Marcus. "You resisted. You failed to comply with a lawful order.
That's an arrestable offense. You looked at the ID. Marcus said, his voice hard. You see that this is my house. If you don't take these cuffs off right now, there is no coming back from this. You're under arrest for disorderly conduct and resisting an officer, Vance announced, doubling down on his stupidity. Get in the car. This is insane, Tom Henderson shouted from the sidewalk. He had his phone out now, filming. We all know him. He's fixing his fence. Look at the ID. I said back up. Vance screamed at the neighbor, his hand hovering near his taser. He was losing control of the scene. The neighbors were closing in, not with violence, but with the undeniable pressure of witnesses who knew the truth. I called the supervisor, Marcus said calmly. I told my wife to call the station as soon as you pulled up. He'll be here in 2 minutes. Vance froze. He hadn't realized Marcus's wife was inside watching. The sound of another siren cut through the air, but this one was different. It shut off a block away. A heavy black SUV rolled up to the scene, parking calmly behind Vance's cruiser. The door opened and Sergeant Miller stepped out. Miller was 55 years old, a veteran of the force with graying hair and a demeanor that commanded respect without raising a voice. He knew the community. He knew his deputies. And he knew trouble when he saw it. He walked onto the lawn, his eyes scanning everything. He saw the weapon, a crowbar lying next to a box of nails. He saw the burglar, a man he recognized from the Veterans Day parade, handcuffed against a hood, and he saw Vance looking sweaty and defensive. Vance, Miller said, his voice low and dangerous. What exactly do we have here? Suspect was reported for burglary in progress, Sarge, Vance said fast, the words tumbling out. I arrived. He had a weapon. Refused to drop it. Refused to comply. Had to go hands-on. He resisted. Miller looked at Marcus. Sir, are you Marcus Thorne? I am Sergeant, Marcus replied. My ID is in the deputy's pocket, along with my military identification. Miller turned his gaze to Vance. It was a look that could peel paint off a wall. Give me the wallet. Vance hesitated, then handed it over. Miller looked at the license. He looked at the house. He looked at the neighbors standing on the sidewalk, shaking their heads. He lives here, Vance, Miller said, his voice rising. He lives here. He's fixing his fence. He resisted, Sarge. He wouldn't get on the ground. Why should he get on the ground in his own front yard for fixing a fence? Miller barked. Did you verify residence? Did you talk to him? Or did you just roll up like Rambo? The call said burglary. Use your eyes, Miller shouted. He walked over to Marcus. Sir, I'm going to remove these cuffs right now. I apologize. I apologize profusely. Miller unlocked the cuffs. Marcus rubbed his wrists where deep red welts had formed. He rotated his shoulder and winced. You hurt him, Miller asked, seeing the wince. He tackled me, Marcus said. I told him about my shoulder. He cranked it anyway. Miller turned back to Vance. The sergeant's face was red with fury. Vance, you are relieved of duty. Give me your badge and your gun. Now. Sarge, come on, he wasn't complying. Badge, gun, now, Miller roared. You arrested a homeowner for gardening. You ignored standard procedure. You ignored the neighbors. You ignored common sense. Get in the back of my SUV. Vance handed over his gear, his hands shaking. For the first time, the reality of what he had done crashed down on him. He wasn't the hero. He was the villain. The fallout was swift, but the damage was done. The video Tom Henderson took went viral within hours. The image of a decorated black veteran being handcuffed on his own lawn while a young deputy screamed at him was played on every news station from New York to Los Angeles. The Pinewood County Sheriff's Department tried to get ahead of it, but the internal affairs investigation was damning. The review of Vance's dashcam footage showed he arrived with bias, escalated without cause, and used excessive force on a compliant citizen. He had ignored the ID,
He had lied about the resistance. Bradley Cummings, the neighbor who made the call, faced his own reckoning. When the 911 tape was released revealing his exaggerated claims of a violent man with a weapon, the community turned on him. He was pariah. He had endangered a man's life because of his own prejudice. Within 2 months, for sale signs went up at the Cummings residence. He moved away in shame. Marcus Thorne sued. He didn't want to. He was a private man. But he knew that if he didn't hold them accountable, it would happen to someone else. Someone who might not have his rank, his discipline, or his neighbors. The lawsuit exposed a pattern of ignored complaints against Deputy Vance. It exposed a failure of supervision. The jury didn't take long. They awarded Marcus Thorne $1.9 million in damages for false arrest, excessive force, and civil rights violations. Kyle Vance was fired. The union refused to back him after seeing the video. He was decertified as a law enforcement officer, ensuring he would never carry a badge and a gun again. At 29, he had to start over, known forever as the cop who arrested a veteran for fixing a fence. But money doesn't fix a shoulder that aches when it rains. And a settlement doesn't erase the memory of being treated like a criminal in front of the home you worked 20 years to pay for. We have to ask ourselves, what kind of society are we building where a man can't repair his own home without risking his life? How many more times do we have to see this script play out before the training changes, before the biases are rooted out? Marcus Thorne still lives in that house. The fence is fixed. He finished it a week after his shoulder healed. He still raises his flag every morning. He still helps the widows with the snow. But when a police cruiser drives down Sycamore Drive now, he doesn't wave. He watches. He waits. Because he knows that sometimes the danger isn't the criminal breaking in. Sometimes it's the knock at the door from the ones who are supposed to protect you. Do you think neighbors who make false racially biased 911 calls should face criminal charges, or should officers be personally liable for settlements like this? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe in justice for men like Marcus, share this story. Let's make sure everyone knows that true service is about character, not just wearing a uniform.
Ma'am, step out of line. You're being detained.
For what? Checking my watch while standing in a CVS?
Don't argue with me. Give me your ID. Now.
You don't have reasonable suspicion, and if you touch me, you're breaking the Constitution.
The security cameras mounted in the corners of the CVS pharmacy on 4th and Main didn't have audio, but the high-definition video was crystal clear. It captured every second of the incident that would eventually be studied in law schools across the country. It showed the fluorescent lights humming over the aisles, the elderly customers shuffling toward the counter, and it showed Officer Kyle Miller making the single most catastrophic assumption of his life. He had no way of knowing that the woman standing in line checking her watch with a look of mild annoyance was the Honorable Eleanor Vance. He didn't know she had spent the last 25 years on the federal bench dismantling organized crime syndicates and preserving the sanctity of the United States Constitution. All Officer Miller saw was a black woman in a trench coat standing near the pharmacy counter, looking at her phone, and in his mind, that didn't look right. Eleanor Vance wasn't nervous. She wasn't casing the joint. She was 62 years old. Her husband was recovering from hip surgery at home, and the pharmacy was taking far too long to fill his pain medication. Eleanor shifted her weight, the heel of her sensible leather boot tapping against the linoleum. She was tired. It was 2:00 p.m. on a Tuesday, and she had just come from a morning session at the district courthouse where she had denied bail to a man accused of wire fraud. She wanted nothing more than to pick up the hydrocodone for her husband, go home and make a pot of tea. She held her prescription slip in one hand and her iPhone in the other, checking her email for a clerk's draft opinion. She was completely absorbed in the text of a Fourth Amendment brief when a shadow fell across her phone screen. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step out of line." The voice was young, authoritative, and tight. Eleanor didn't jump. She didn't gasp. She simply looked up, sliding her reading glasses down the bridge of her nose. Standing a few feet away was a uniformed police officer. Officer Kyle Miller was 28 fit, with a high and tight haircut and a posture that suggested he was ready for a fight. He had been on the force for 4 years and had recently been assigned to a task force targeting prescription fraud rings in the metro area. The briefing that morning had been vague watch for people loitering, people on phones coordinating with others, people who looked out of place. To Miller, Eleanor looked out of place. "Excuse me," Eleanor said. Her voice was the same one she used to address unruly defense attorneys, calm, resonant, and laced with steel. "I said step out of line. We need to have a talk." Miller said, his hand resting instinctively near his belt thumb, hooked over the leather. He didn't draw his weapon, but the threat of force was implicit in his stance. "I am waiting for a prescription for my husband," Eleanor stated, holding up the paper slip. "I have been standing here for 15 minutes. I am not stepping out of line and losing my place." Miller stepped closer, invading her personal space. This was a tactic he had learned in the academy, established dominance force compliance. "Ma'am, you've been observing the counter and checking your phone repeatedly. That matches the profile of a spotter for a fraud crew. Now step away from the other customers, or I will assist you." The other customers, mostly seniors picking up blood pressure medication, began to turn around. The pharmacy was quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerators and the murmur of the pharmacists behind the glass. Eleanor felt the eyes of the room on her. She knew exactly what this was. She had written opinions on Terry versus Ohio. She knew the standard for a stop and frisk. She knew what reasonable suspicion looked like, and looking at a watch while black was not it. "Officer," Eleanor said, turning her full body to face him, her posture straightening to her full height of 5'9". "You are detaining me. For a detention to be lawful, you must have a reasonable, articulable suspicion that criminal activity is afoot. Checking the time and reading an email while waiting for a slow pharmacist is not criminal activity. It is the behavior of a busy citizen. Now, unless you can articulate a crime, I suggest you let me pick up my husband's medication." Miller blinked. He hadn't expected a lecture. Most people stammered. Most people got scared. This woman was talking down to him, and that triggered something ugly in his gut. He interpreted her confidence not as innocence, but as the arrogance of a career criminal who thought she knew the system. "I don't need a law lecture from you," Miller snapped, his voice rising loud enough for the back of the store to hear. "I need ID. Now, hand it over." "I am under no obligation to provide identification unless I am being lawfully detained for a specific crime," Eleanor replied. She wasn't being difficult for the sake of it. She was holding the line. She was a guardian of the law, and she refused to let it be trampled in a CVS aisle. "Am I under arrest, officer? You're about to be—" Miller threatened, stepping within striking distance. "You're interfering with a police investigation." "I am the investigation, apparently," Eleanor retorted coolly, "and it is a baseless one." The air in the pharmacy grew heavy. A woman in a floral dress near the greeting cards aisle pulled out her phone. She held it up, the red record light blinking. Eleanor saw the phone and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. Good, she thought. The record is essential. "Last chance?" Miller said, his face flushing red. "ID now." "My identification is in my purse," Eleanor said slowly, telegraphing her movements. "I am happy to show it to you to clear up your confusion. But I want to be clear, I am doing this under duress, and I am formally stating that you lack reasonable suspicion for this stop." She reached into her leather tote bag. Her movements were deliberate. She bypassed her wallet initially and touched the leather casing of her federal credentials, then paused. No, she would give him her driver's license first. Let him dig his hole. She pulled out her state ID and held it out. Miller snatched it from her hand. He didn't even look at the name. He looked at the address, an upscale neighborhood, one of the most expensive in the city. "This your real address?" he scoffed. "Or is this a fake?" "It looks like a fake." "It is a valid government-issued ID," Eleanor said. Run it. I'll run it when I'm good and ready, Miller said. Right now, I want to know who you're texting. Who's the supplier? I am emailing my law clerk, Eleanor said, her patience thinning by the nanosecond. About a suppression hearing regarding a warrantless search, roughly similar to the one you are conducting right now. Miller laughed, a short, sharp bark of disbelief. Law clerk. Right. And I'm the police commissioner. You know, you people always have a story. It's always, I'm waiting for a ride or I'm buying medicine, but you can't stand still. You're twitchy. I am twitchy, as you call it, because my husband is in pain and I'm being harassed by a public servant who evidently skipped constitutional law day at the academy, Eleanor said. The insult landed. Miller's eyes narrowed. Turn around, Miller commanded. Excuse me. Turn around. Hands behind your back. You're detained. I'm checking you for weapons and stolen scripts. You will do no such thing, Eleanor said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming the voice that had silenced courtrooms for 2 decades. You have no probable cause for a search. You have no consent. If you touch me, officer, you are violating my Fourth Amendment rights. And you are opening yourself and this city up to liability that will bankrupt your department. Stop resisting, Miller shouted, reaching for her arm. I am not resisting. I am stating the law, Eleanor said, pulling her arm back instinctively. That was all Miller needed. In his mind, she had pulled away. That was resisting. That was physical obstruction. He grabbed her wrist, twisting it sharply behind her back. Eleanor gasped in pain, her shoulder straining. The gathered crowd gasped with her. Hey! A man in the back yelled. She didn't do anything. Back up! Miller yelled over his shoulder, struggling to control a 62-year-old woman who was barely fighting back. Everyone back up or you're all going to jail for obstruction. He shoved Eleanor against the shelf of vitamins. Bottles of vitamin C and fish oil rattled and fell to the floor. You want to play lawyer? Miller grunted, grabbing her other wrist. You can play lawyer in the holding cell. Officer. Eleanor said, her face pressed against a row of Centrum silver, her voice strained but unbroken. I am going to give you one opportunity to stop. My name is Eleanor Vance. I am a senior judge for the United States District Court. If you click those cuffs, you are ending your career. Miller hesitated for a fraction of a second. A judge numbered judges were old white men. Judges didn't shop at CVS in a trench coat on a Tuesday. Judges didn't talk back to cops. They worked with cops. She was lying. It was another hustle. Tell it to the judge. Miller quipped a line he had heard in movies and always wanted to use. He slapped the handcuffs on. The metal ratchet sound echoed through the silent pharmacy. Click, click. You are making a grave mistake, Eleanor whispered. The only mistake was you thinking you could run a scam in my sector, Miller said, pulling her upright. He grabbed her by the bicep hard. The woman recording the video moved closer. I have this whole thing, ma'am. I have it all. Thank you, Eleanor said to the witness, maintaining her composure despite the humiliation of being manhandled in public. Please capture his badge number. Badge 492, Officer Miller, San Diego Police Department. Miller marched her toward the door. Eleanor walked with her head high. She did not struggle. She did not scream. She knew that any physical resistance would be used to justify his aggression later. She had to be perfect. She had to be the model plaintiff. As they passed the counter, the pharmacist looked over, wide-eyed. Mrs. Vance, your prescription is ready. Keep it for me, David, Eleanor called out calmly as she was shoved through the automatic doors. I'll be back for it after I handle some business at the precinct. The automatic doors slid shut behind them, cutting off the cool air of the pharmacy and pushing them into the harsh afternoon sun. Miller opened the back door of his cruiser and pushed Eleanor inside. The plastic seat was hard, unforgiving. She maneuvered herself as best she could with her hands bound behind her back, her shoulder throbbing where he had twisted it. Miller slammed the door. He walked around to the driver's side, adrenaline pumping through his veins. He felt good. He had taken down a suspect who thought she could talk her way out of it. He got in, started the engine, and pulled out into traffic. The drive to the precinct was short, maybe 10 minutes. For the first 2 minutes, silence reigned. Miller glanced in the rearview mirror. He expected her to be crying. He expected her to be begging him to let her go, offering bribes or screaming threats. Instead, the woman in the back seat was staring out the window with a look of intense concentration. She wasn't looking at the scenery. She was looking through it. In her mind, Eleanor was already drafting the complaint. Paragraph 1, jurisdiction and venue. Paragraph 2, the parties. Plaintiff Eleanor Vance, a citizen of the United States. Defendant Kyle Miller, acting under color of law. She memorized the timestamps. She replayed the conversation verbatim in her head to ensure she wouldn't forget a single word. I don't need a law lecture. Matches the profile. Miller cleared his throat. The silence was unnerving him. You know, if you just cooperate, it goes easier, he said, trying to regain the psychological upper hand. Just tell us who the leader of the ring is. I am invoking my Fifth Amendment right to remain silent, Eleanor said. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. I will not speak to you further without counsel, although I suspect I know the law better than any counsel you could provide. Miller gripped the steering wheel tighter. Why was she so calm? Why did she sound like that? The phrase senior judge popped back into his head. He shook it off. Impossible. She was just a good liar. But a seed of doubt, cold and sharp, began to root in his stomach. He replayed the interaction. The way the pharmacist had called her Mrs. Vance. The way she had produced her ID immediately. The quality of her clothes up close, that trench coat looked like cashmere. He glanced at the computer terminal in his car. He hadn't run her name yet. He had been so focused on the arrest. He decided to wait until booking. The sergeant would sort it out. If she was a judge, well, she shouldn't have been acting suspicious. That was his logic. It was flimsy, and he knew it. They arrived at the precinct. Miller parked in the sally port. He hauled Eleanor out of the car. Her wrists were chafed. This way, he muttered. He led her through the heavy steel doors into the processing area. The smell of bleach and stale coffee hit them. It was a familiar smell to Eleanor, but usually she smelled it from the other side of the bench or during facility inspections. Never as a prisoner. Sergeant Frank O'Malley was behind the booking desk. O'Malley was 58, 2 years from a pension, and he had the weary look of a man who had seen every variety of human stupidity the city had to offer. He looked up over his reading glasses as Miller brought Eleanor to the counter. What do we have, Miller? O'Malley asked, reaching for a clipboard. Interfering with an investigation resisting disorderly conduct, Miller recited. Suspected prescription fraud spotter. Picked her up at the CVS on 4th. O'Malley looked at Eleanor. He looked at her boots. He looked at her coat. He looked at her face. He frowned. He had seen a lot of junkies. He had seen a lot of fraudsters. This woman looked like she was about to chair a board meeting. Ma'am, O'Malley said politely, I'm going to need to take your personal effects. Of course, Sergeant, Eleanor said. My purse is with Officer Miller. Miller dropped the leather tote onto the counter. Check it for extra scripts. I bet the bottom is lined with them. O'Malley opened the bag. He didn't dump it. He reached in. He pulled out a wallet. It was Yves Saint Laurent. He pulled out a smartphone. He pulled out a distinct leather folio. He opened the wallet to get the ID. He stopped. He stared at the card in the clear plastic window. Then he reached into the bag and pulled out the leather folio. He flipped it open. The gold badge of the United States Judiciary glinted under the harsh fluorescent lights. The ID card next to it read, Eleanor Vance, United States District Judge, Southern District. O'Malley froze. The color drained from his face, leaving it a sickly shade of gray. He looked at the badge. He looked at Eleanor. He looked at Miller, who was leaning against the counter, looking smug. "Miller," O'Malley said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Yes, Sarge. Find the stash. Take the cuffs off," O'Malley said. "What? Why, she's—" "I said take the damn cuffs off right now," O'Malley roared, slamming his hand on the desk. The sound echoed like a gunshot. The entire booking room went silent. 2 other officers stopped what they were doing. Miller jumped. "Sarge, she—" "Miller, you idiot!" O'Malley hissed, holding up the leather folio. "Do you know who this is? This is Judge Vance. Federal court. She puts people away for life. She signs the warrants you pray for." Miller stared at the badge. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The air left his lungs. Judge. Federal judge. The words bounced around his skull, colliding with the memories of the last 20 minutes. The manhandling. The handcuffs. The "tell it to the judge" line. His stomach dropped through the floor. Eleanor stood perfectly still, her hands still bound behind her back. "Officer Miller," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. "I believe the sergeant gave you a direct order." Miller's hands shook as he reached for his key. He fumbled, scratching the metal against the cuffs before finally getting the key in the hole. He turned it. The cuffs sprang open. Eleanor brought her hands forward. She rubbed her wrists. There were red, angry marks where the metal had dug in. She looked at them, then looked at Miller. "Sergeant," Eleanor said, turning her attention to O'Malley, "I want the watch commander down here, immediately, and I want the chief of police on the phone. Do not process me. Do not put me in the system, but do not think for 1 second that this is over." "Yes, Your Honor," O'Malley said, grabbing the phone. "Right away, Your Honor. Please have a seat. Can I get you water, coffee?" "I don't want water," Eleanor said. "I want to preserve evidence. Officer Miller's body camera. I want the footage pulled and secured before he has a chance to turn it off or accidentally delete it." I wouldn't," Miller stammered. He looked small now. The aggressive posture was gone, replaced by the terror of a child who had broken a priceless vase. "You have the right to remain silent, Officer Miller," Eleanor said, turning her gaze back to him. "I suggest you use it." Within 3 minutes, the room was full of brass. Lieutenant Harris, the watch commander, arrived breathless. He took one look at Eleanor, recognized her from a high-profile case the previous year, and looked like he might vomit. "Judge Vance," Harris said, stepping forward with his hands raised in apology, "I cannot express how sorry I am. There has obviously been a terrible misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding, Lieutenant," Eleanor said. "There is a violation of civil rights. There is an unlawful detention. There is an assault, and there is a kidnapping. Your officer arrested me for standing in line." "We will handle this internally immediately," Harris promised. "You are free to go, of course. We can have a car take you home, or back to your car. I am not leaving until I have a copy of the incident report and the case number," Eleanor said. We haven't filed a report yet, Your Honor," Miller whispered from the corner. "Then you will write one," Eleanor commanded. "Right now. You will write down exactly what your probable cause was. You will articulate in writing under penalty of perjury why you put hands on me. And if you lie, Officer Miller, if you deviate 1 inch from the truth that the video cameras captured, I will have you charged with perjury in addition to deprivation of rights." Miller sat at a desk. His hands were shaking so hard he could barely type. He looked at the screen. What could he write? Subject looked at watch. Subject had attitude. It all looked ridiculous in black and white. While Miller typed, the captain of the precinct arrived. He had been at lunch. He had run 2 blocks. He was sweating. "Judge Vance," he gasped. "Please, let's discuss this in my office." "I have nothing to say to you in private, Captain," Eleanor said. "Everything that needs to be said will be said in a federal complaint. I am filing suit against this department, against the city, and against Officer Miller personally. Judge, please, the captain pleaded. "This will ruin the department's reputation. We can work this out. We can terminate him. We can—" "This is not about one officer," Eleanor said, her voice rising so everyone in the room could hear. "This is about a culture that allows a young man with a badge to look at a 60-year-old black woman buying medicine and see a criminal. It is about the fact that if I were not a federal judge, if I were a housekeeper or a teacher or a nurse, I would be in a cell right now and no one would care. I would be resisting. I would be a statistic." She grabbed her purse from the counter. She checked to make sure her credentials were there. "I want the digital files of the body cam and the dash cam sent to my attorney by close of business today," she said. "If they are corrupted or lost, I will assume spoliation of evidence and I will instruct a jury to infer the worst. Do we understand each other?" "Yes, Your Honor," the captain whispered. "Good day, gentlemen," Eleanor said. She turned and walked out of the precinct. She walked straight into the bright afternoon sunlight. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. She called an Uber. While she waited, she called her husband. "Ellie," his groggy voice answered. "Did you get the meds?" "I'm on my way, honey," she said, her voice softening. "I had a slight delay, but I'm coming home." She arrived home, gave her husband his medication, and made him soup. Then she went into her study. She sat at her mahogany desk, surrounded by leather-bound law books. She pulled out a fresh legal pad. She uncapped her fountain pen. She began to write. 3 days later, the lawsuit was filed, Vance versus City of San Diego et al. It was a masterpiece of legal writing. It alleged violations of the 4th and 14th Amendments. It alleged false imprisonment, assault battery, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. But the real bomb dropped when the video footage leaked. The woman from the pharmacy had posted it to TikTok. It had 10,000 views in the first hour. By the time the lawsuit was filed, it had 15 million. The nation watched Officer Miller twist the arm of a grandmotherly figure. They heard her calm, terrifying warning. They heard him dismiss her. CNN ran the clip every hour. Fox News debated the compliance aspect, but even their legal analysts admitted Miller had no probable cause. The NAACP issued a statement. The ACLU offered support. The San Diego Police Department was under siege. The internal affairs investigation, usually a slow process, moved at light speed. They pulled Miller's file. They found a pattern. Over his 4 years, Miller had stopped black women 400% more often than white women. He had a history of attitude arrests charges that were later dropped. But nobody had ever checked. Until he arrested a judge. The conclusion was inevitable. 6 weeks after the incident, Kyle Miller was called into the chief's office. He was terminated for cause. He was stripped of his badge and gun. The union didn't even fight for him. The video was too damning. But Eleanor didn't settle for a firing. She pushed the lawsuit. She forced the city to depose the chief. She forced them to reveal their training manuals, which showed a woeful lack of implicit bias training. The city settled 9 months later. They paid Eleanor Vance $1.2 million. It was the largest settlement for a single wrongful arrest in the city's history. Eleanor didn't keep a dime. She established the Vance Legal Defense Fund, a nonprofit dedicated to providing top-tier legal representation for indigent women wrongfully accused of crimes. Miller left the state. He tried to get a job in security in Arizona, but a simple Google search of his name brought up the video. He was unhireable. He ended up working in a warehouse loading boxes, answering to a supervisor who watched his every move. Judge Eleanor Vance returned to the bench. But something had changed. She sat a little taller. When police officers testified in her courtroom, she watched them a little more closely. When a defendant claimed they were stopped for no reason, she didn't automatically dismiss it. One afternoon, a year later, she sat in her chambers looking out the window. The city looked peaceful from up here, but she knew what happened on the ground. She knew that justice wasn't a guarantee. It was a constant, exhausting fight. She thought about the moment in the pharmacy, the fear she had pushed down, the helplessness that had threatened to swallow her. She thought about the millions of people who felt that every day who didn't have a badge to pull out of a purse. She picked up her gavel. It felt heavy in her hand, a tool of power, a tool of justice, but only if the hand holding it was willing to strike true. She stood up, smoothed her robe, and walked toward the courtroom door. There was work to do.